Mr. Hill, I'm putting you on the spot because this was not here when we produced the episode before.
I know. I
FYI.
just saw
What
like,
is
oh,
your
we're doing this.
keep you on your toes? Uh-huh.
Listen, okay.
What is your favorite award show moment? What comes to mind most immediately when I say award shows?
With my favorite, the first moment that comes to mind when I'm put on the spot like this, would be the Academy Awards. Like, it's for a long time I've had this like dream in my mind of hosting the Academy Awards, specifically the 100th Academy Awards, in 2028. Um,
What number
I
we at?
We're at 96, I think 95, something like that this year.
All right, so y'all know what to do. Run it up.
We got time. We got time. Right. We working it.
We got time.
Um, it wasn't a specific win that I really enjoyed. I appreciated the presentation. But like I think it was like 2012, 2013. It was I know specifically Hugh Jackman and Anne Hathaway were a part of that open. I think they hosted that year. But what I loved
Mm.
was
Mhm.
for the actor awards, they had previous winners come out and present the awards. So like for best actress or best supporting actress, it's, Whoopi Goldberg and Oprah Winfrey and like all these different people come down and like they talk about each of the nominees and their work and like what was so fantastic about their performance. And then they announce the winner and the person comes up and is kind of like welcomed into this club of Oscar winners. And I just thought it was a really beautiful way to do it. As a producer, it gave me anxiety because I was like, this is
Mm.
a really long way to do it. But that's my favorite like award show kind of moment that comes to mind first. What about you?
You know what's funny about this? I'm gonna give you my answer in 3 seconds.
Oh
But what's
God.
funny about this is based on our two examples of like the award show moments that came to mind most for us, y'all will be able to get a good idea of just how interesting this friendship is
Oh God.
because the
Now I'm
award show
nervous as
moment
fuck.
that I'm going with the award show moment that I'm going with is the BET Awards hosted by a one Monique.
Oh my
Okay,
God.
when
Yes.
yes,
I
you
know
know it,
exactly what this is.
you know it. Absolutely. When Monique hosted, she hosted twice, and she did this Beyonce
So good.
inspired dance. There was a little Usher tribute, and she had all of these, big girl dancers behind before
The original Big Girls.
before Lizzo.
Yes.
Listen, before Lizzo was out here with her, big body Benzes behind her,
Listen.
Monique was on the BET stage carrying. I also want to shout out 2 Tons of Fun. If we really gonna take it back, take it back, take it back. That's your music history. Look that up.
What
But that's my favorite award show moment.
what I appreciate about that moment is like to do Beyonce in front of Beyonce. I
Big
mean,
purr.
listen, that takes
Big
some
purr.
guts, right? And I loved it. And she murdered it, right? Like hair toss, cap
Absolutely.
choreography, the short little skirts, like it was fantastic. I love that moment. It's so good. It's so good. Okay.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I kind of want to get into like the complex and complicado of this, right? It's not quite a fan and anti for those of you who've been listening to the show for a while. Like we were trying to make this a fan and an anti, but it was just not really hitting. It is much more complex and complicado. I've been
Mm-hmm.
joking with Tre'vell that I'm the straight man on this show, not to be confused with the
Mm.
heterosexual guy on this show because that's a different
Hate that
thing.
for you, friend.
Listen, right? Not that, right? But like I recognize that like I'm I'm the one in this conversation that is coming to it a little bit less experience in this conversation. You have obviously been kind of working on
Mm-hmm.
this kind of these kinds of changes that have been happening at award shows. But when I'm thinking about the challenges that could come along with this, right? First of all, I know that there is a conversation for folks about degendering awards that really tends to skew toward men. I was looking at some data that said that if we look at the Oscars all the way up to 2015, when this piece was written, that like 17% of nominees had been women, right? And like the
Mm-hmm.
number of women in the industry, whether we're talking about film or television or music or whatever, is significantly less, right? We talk about working in a male dominated industry. And I'm curious how the factor of men being so prominent in positions of power, in voting, in the trades and all that, how does that affect the idea of
Mhm.
degendering the awards and it being a level playing field for women?
So I'm gonna hit on your question directly in a moment. But I think it's important to first say that the issue with gendered award categories, um, as many people see it, many non-binary people and other people, is that if you have gendered award categories, what then do we do with the non-binary folks? Right?
Mm.
What category do they go in? Right? What does because you can't put Sam Smith in best male, performance category. You can't put Emma Corrin in best lead actress category because those identifiers, right, do not describe them, right? And so there's a history, right, of various award shows basically, I guess you could say, allowing, quote unquote, non-binary people to self-select which of the two gendered categories that they have to choose. And various folks have decided in various ways how to navigate that. Some folks have, opted for the actor category, because the actor label technically is a, gender neutral um term for actors, right? And then you have other people who have completely opted out of consideration, right, for various entities. And then you also have folks who have at least been allowed to be considered, right, in both categories. Kelly Mantle is somebody who comes to mind. They're a gender queer performer, and they had a movie that came out a few years ago, and the Film Academy basically said that they could be considered for nomination by those committees, in either category. So that's how the Film Academy worked away that around that at that time. Go ahead.
I would imagine that having to self-select is kind of like the conversation we have about going to the bathroom and having to choose between, and going out into the world and being misgendered and those kinds of things.
Absolutely, absolutely. Like it. I wrote a piece about for Extra Magazine about the passports, and wanting to go through the process of getting the gender neutral marker on my passport. And part of the piece I talk about having to go to doctors' offices, having to go to the DMV, having to go to all these places where they only have binary options, and so I'm forced to misgender myself, right, to seek out these services that we all are supposed to have access to. And so I think there is some correlation right here in terms of folks having to basically choose, right, one category over another. And so I wanted to first say, right, that like that is the a part core of this issue and why there's so much talk, right? Especially as we see more and more people are beginning to identify as non-binary, both in public visibility wise, but also in your local communities, right? And so we need to make sure that we have space for all of us to be accurately represented. Now, to your question about if um if we degender awards and you have women competing up against men, that because of the isms and obias of our society, men will, more often than not get recognized, and the women will not. I would say in response to that, that the award show is not the issue,
Mm.
right? Like the award category rather is not the issue there, right? There are these broader issues that we need to be discussing about power, about who gets about who has green light power in the industry, about who gets to do certain types of movies, and ultimately when we're talking about award shows, about the ethos of your awards nominating and voting body, right? If you have a body, right, that is going to, for whatever reason, privilege more often than not men over women, or vice versa, however the identities fall down, you got some other things that you really need to be worried about, in my estimation, right? And the awards category ends up being a band aid on a much bigger issue, right? Because what we do know, to your point, right, is that oftentimes right now, the only way, right, the only reason, right, we see women get on some of these stages is because of the gendered categories, right? And so to me, in my head, it's like, oh, well, then maybe the voting body isn't, you know, equally yoked, if you will, right, to think differently about who gets, platformed and who does not. And what can the organization do? What can the industry do? What can society do, right, to make those necessary changes, as opposed to just throwing our hands up and saying, right, that it is okay that the only way women get on stage is for gendered categories, which, if I'm gonna go a little step further, then I would say that gendered categories at award shows are sexist.